Welcome to today's track guide of the Hungaroring. It's Brandon here, and let's get into the lap. Firstly, you can afford to run a bit wide over the curbing to begin your lap. Keep your foot down for the start finish straight. The first braking point will be just before the 150 meter board on the fence. Another braking point you can use is the dark patch on the track. In the Ferrari on this game, you can brake just after the dark patch begins and just before the 150 meter board. In the BMW M6, I had to brake just as the dark patch began. You may have to experiment a little bit to find the perfect point. After you begin slowing down, we go into first gear before the corner begins. Remember to trail brake, lift off the throttle very briefly when you ride the curbing to stabilize the car at mid-corner, and then begin to ease the throttle back on and then run it right out to the curbing on the left. Next we move on to turn 2, which can be a little more tricky. In the Ferrari I brake just after the curbing on the right begins. In the BMW I brake right as the curbing begins. Remember to start right out wide, slowly turn in. This corner can be a double apex, so at first you want to just miss the inner curbing on the left. Drift out slightly wide as you trail brake to get the front end to bite. You might even need to coast slightly and just miss the inner curbing on the second apex to avoid unstabilizing the car and ease the throttle back on. Make sure to bring the car right back to the left as we need to decrease the turning angle for the next corner as much as possible. If the conditions are good, we should be able to take this corner flat out in most cars. The Ferrari gets very unstable if you hit this curb on the right, so do your best to miss the bump. The BMW seems to be able to take this bump pretty well. You can run out wide on the exit, and we now aim for the next turn. At turn 4 we want to be parallel with the curbing on the right to begin with. In the Ferrari we can brake just after the curbing begins. With the BMW it might be better to brake just as the curbing begins. We want to put our car right over the curbing on the left, but the Ferrari can't afford to go too far over the curbing as it becomes extremely unstable, whereas the BMW absorbs the curb much better. As we hit the curb we want to lift off the throttle slightly to stabilize the car, and immediately after we pass the curb we want to get back on the throttle and bring the car back out to the left. For the next turn, brake just after the blue and green walls end and trail brake right into this corner to keep the car stable. Keep close to the inside of the corner, and around halfway through we need to ease the throttle back on carefully to stop flicking the rear end out. Run right out onto the curbs, and now we approach the chicane. This part of the track is probably the hardest to get right, especially if you are hot lapping. In this game the track limits allow you to cut right over the chicane, but it is extremely bumpy and is very easy to spin out on. I'd suggest only to cut the curbing if you're hot lapping or maybe qualifying. If you're on a race I would recommend just keeping some wheels on the track. For this example I'll be going as fast as I can and cutting right over the corner as much as possible. First place the car right to the left, brake as the curbing begins and shift down to second gear. Turn in early and avoid the orange sausage curbing. On the second part of the chicane you can't cut too much and you can still be thrown off the track really easily if you mess it up. So try straighten up the car and stay parallel with this line on the left. While going over the chicane I'd say be very careful with your throttle inputs, as the slightest mistake can end up with you facing backwards. I haven't mastered cutting the chicane, and to be honest I'd rather just take the chicane normally, as it is more likely that your car will stay on the track after you get through it. If you have survived this part of the track, then run out on the curbing on the right and prepare for turn 8. Brake as you reach this pole on the right, aim right over the curbing and coast over it to keep the car stable. Once the car is steady again, you can accelerate a little and get the car back to the left. Touch the brakes gently, shift down a gear to get the car right on the inside of this turn. At the apex, put the throttle back on and run over to the curbing again. Turn right and then left again and keep the throttle right down because this corner is flat. Be aware that if the conditions are bad and the track is slippery, then you may have to lift it off the throttle slightly. On this game I have found that if you ride this curb on the left it'll pull you and spin you out, so avoid that, even in the BMW. Bring it back out to the curbing and brake shortly as it begins. Coast slightly, keeping the car steady, and once you reach the apex here you can put your foot down. Run over the curbing on the exit and bring it up to turn 12. Brake as the curbing begins, make sure to coast shortly again over this curbing on the right to stabilize the car, and once you are over it you can accelerate again. Move over to the right, brake just after the Assetto Corsa sign. Trail brake for this corner and make sure you have a late apex. Start off wide and begin to accelerate as the corner ends. Avoid wheel spin at all costs and make your way to the final corner. Just after the marshal stand on the left, touch the brake and shift down a gear and make sure to stay pretty close to the inside, because if you get a bit too wide and get caught up on the loose rubber on the outside, you'll lose a lot of time and the car will become really slippery and hard to drive. Ease the throttle on once more and run to the exit curbing. Foot down, and this is a lap of the Hungaroring. This has just been a pretty general guide on this track. It may not be perfect, so I'm sorry if I missed some things, and I know I mainly compared the Ferrari and the BMW on this game. I've also noticed the Lamborghinis gets pretty unstable over bumps just like the Ferrari, maybe even worse. So be aware of that, and if you have any questions you can ask in the description. I'll do my best to answer. If I don't, I hope someone else will be able to help you. But yeah, thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.